Nara, by the laws of our ancestors, you have been found guilty. Your betrayal demands the ultimate sacrifice.
What would you do if you saw a young woman tied to a post, flames rising, accused of stealing food, and no one listened when she said she was innocent? In the village of Kalari, Nara faced death while the crowd cheered for justice. But only one man noticed the flame-shaped scar on her wrist, the same mark of the girl who once saved his life from a fire years ago. What no one knew was this: the village's sacred grain wasn't stolen. It was hidden beneath the floor of the chief's own house. The real thief? A desperate father trading food for medicine to save his dying son. This story is not just about betrayal or survival. It's about conscience, sacrifice, and the terrifying price of silence. When truth finally returned, it did not come with swords, but with a dying child and a man who refused to let fear define justice. Where are you watching from today? Could this story reach your village, your city, your heart? From Kalari, with love and truth, thank you for listening. The sun burned red above Kalari. It wasn't just heat. It was the kind of sun that peeled skin from bone, that pressed down like judgment. Dust hung still in the air, and the wind had stopped breathing. In the center of the village square, a girl stood bound to a wooden post. Her name was Nara. Her feet were bare on cracked earth, and the ground was hot enough to blister. Around her, villagers gathered in silence. No one spoke. No one moved too close. Not when the drums were sounding. Not when justice was about to be decided by the voice of one man. Dakan rose from his carved wooden seat, flanked by guards in red sashes. His eyes were sharp beneath his ceremonial crown, a circle of woven bone and iron thorns. He looked not at the girl, but at the parchment in his hand. His voice carried through the stillness. "Nara of no clan," he began, "you stand accused of stealing sacred grain from the village store. Food meant for the gods. Food meant to be untouched." The wind returned for a brief second, swirling dust against the crowd's ankles. From behind Dakan, inside a shaded silk-draped palanquin, came a soft, dry cough, a child's cough, so faint it might have been missed. But it wasn't. Not by Dakan. His eyes flickered sideways. His hand holding the parchment trembled, just once, then grew still again. He continued reading as if nothing had happened. Nara didn't flinch. Her face was streaked with sweat and soot, her hair wild from the night's struggle. But her voice, when it came, was low and steady. "I took the scraps, the leftovers, not the sacred grain. I gave them to the children with no parents, the ones who sleep under holes in the roof." A murmur swept the crowd, hushed quickly by a glare from one of Dakan's guards. From the crowd, a voice broke free. "She gave me a cake, she did." It was a boy, no more than 6. Dirty cheeks, eyes wide with tears. His voice cracked with fear as he pointed. "I was hungry. She gave it to me." The guard silenced him fast. One shove and the boy was swallowed by the bodies around him, his cries muffled by adult hands. Nara's gaze never left Dakan. At the far edge of the crowd, half hidden in the shade of the banyan trees, a man in a hunter's cloak stood with arms crossed. Kiren. He had no allegiance. He lived in the forest where judgment came from storms and fang. He hadn't spoken to anyone in Kalari in months. He was turning to leave when he saw it. A mark on Nara's wrist just above the rope that held her, faint, burned into the flesh, a scar in the shape of flame. His breath caught. Years ago, he'd nearly died in a wildfire. Would have, if not for a hand that had pulled him from the smoke. A small hand. A girl's hand. He hadn't remembered her face. Until now. She looked at him. Just for a moment. One heartbeat, one shared breath. And then he turned away again. Fast, like it meant nothing. But the drum kept beating. The drum was in his chest. The air felt tighter. The light too sharp. He walked, but not far. Just to the trees, just enough to be unseen, just enough to hide the shake in his hands. The wind had died again. The village was waiting for punishment to begin, waiting to watch someone burn. And Chiron, heart-pounding, asked himself in silence, If I turn my back now, does that make me one of them? The truest question doesn't shout, it whispers, and it doesn't leave you alone. Ugh. Night fell, but the drums didn't stop. They changed rhythm, slower now, deeper, like a heartbeat turned into stone. Kieran sat by his fire in the woods, sharpening his blade with a flat river stone. The forest around him was quiet, too quiet for this hour. Even the owls held their breath. He was halfway through tying his bedroll when he heard it. A cry, not a scream of pain, something smaller, fragile, familiar. He stood, listened. Again it came, a child sobbing. He followed the sound, stepping fast over roots and stone, knife drawn without realizing. But what he found made his breath catch in his throat. It wasn't a child. It was a bird, a jungle dove, perched on a blackened branch, singing out into nothing. Beneath it, ashes, the remains of a camp. And there, fluttering near the coals, a red scrap of cloth. Nara's cloth, fresh boot prints in the dirt. Heavy, military. He knelt and touched the ground, still warm. They'd taken her to the clearing, the old place, the one the village used when they wanted to keep things quiet. He knew what they were planning. A fire for the gods. No public spectacle, no second chance. The same as what had happened to his father. The same lie dressed in a new story. His feet moved before his mind did. Every step toward the clearing felt like walking through old smoke. He remembered her again, years ago, smaller than him, coughing in the fire, yanking him by the arm toward the river. She had scars even then, scars shaped like choices. And now she was the one tied down. His pulse quickened. He crouched low behind a fallen tree. He saw them. 2 guards, one piling wood, the other lighting torches. And Nara bound again, but this time slumped. Her head hung low. Her lips moved, too quiet to hear. Maybe she was praying. Maybe she was saying goodbye. He didn't wait for an answer. He moved. Fast. 2 breaths. 1 knife. The torch dropped. Flames licked the dirt. The other turned, too late. Kieran's blade found flesh. Silence, then thudding collapse. He reached her, cut the ropes with shaking hands. Her eyes fluttered open. "Kieran?" she whispered. He didn't answer. He lifted her in his arms and ran. The fire caught behind them, but the wind had shifted. Smoke rose but didn't chase. The jungle opened to receive them. And behind them, the drums went silent. Not because the ritual had ended, but because the truth had run away. At the edge of the woods, they stopped. Kieran laid her down beside a stream, scooped water to her lips. Her skin was fevered, her breathing shallow. "I thought you left," she said. "I did." A pause. "I saw the scar." She looked down at her wrist, then away. The wind picked up. Leaves danced around them like ghosts. He asked her quietly, "Why didn't you run?" Her answer came like a stone skipping across water. "Because the ones I fed can't." He turned to the trees. The forest was watching. Or maybe it was just himself reflected back through the dark. He wanted to be invisible again, but silence had a shape now. It looked like a girl who once pulled him from fire. It looked like a woman about to die for feeding hungry mouths. And he realized something bitter and sharp. If he walked away again, the forest wouldn't take him back. At his feet, Nara stirred. He knelt, covered her with his cloak. Her hand slipped into his, weak but certain. No more drums. Only the crackle of fire dying far behind them. Only the sound of breath, close and real. But in his chest, something else stirred. Not anger. Not fear. A vow. Not loud. Just steady. Like the beat of something beginning. The fire had barely died behind them when the storm arrived. It didn't whisper. It crashed in. Sudden. Hard. Furious. Like the gods had been watching and decided to answer too late. Wind howled through the trees with the sound of voices that no one had spoken in years. Branches cracked. Leaves flew like knives. Kieran moved fast, holding Nara close to his chest. Her body was limp, breath shallow. The cloak wrapped around her was soaked already. The rain wasn't gentle. It struck the ground like fists. It struck his skin like questions he didn't want to answer. He reached a cave he'd used before. nothing more than a black mouth under a ledge of rock, half hidden by moss and fallen wood. He ducked inside, laid Nara down against the driest patch he could find. Water still dripped from the stone above. It tasted like rust. She stirred but didn't speak. Kieran pulled dry bark from his pouch, his fingers fumbling. The flint slipped once, twice. The third spark caught, then died. He grit his teeth, tried again. This time, a thread of flame licked the fibers and held. The fire took slowly, but it took. The orange glow danced across the stone walls. The storm raged louder outside. He sat back, breath heavy, watching her face in the flicker, pale, worn, but alive. That should have been enough. But the drums were still in him. They hadn't stopped since the square. Not really. He turned to the cave mouth, stared out into the dark trees beyond. Rain slashed across the clearing like whipcords. The air smelled of wet earth and warning. He told himself again he wasn't part of it. That Kalari was behind him. That the fire, the rope, the lies, none of it was his anymore. But memory doesn't care about what you left behind, especially when it has claws. A branch snapped far off. Not a storm snap, a human sound. He froze, waited. Nothing, just thunder, rolling like grief. He went to the cave wall, grabbed his blade, eyes scanning through rain. But there was no one, only silence returning like a dare. He came back to the fire. Nara had turned her head, eyes half open now. "Where are we?" she whispered. "Safe for now." Her voice broke. "They took the children." He looked away. "I saw them," she said, "when they dragged me out, little ones, tied together like firewood." Kieran didn't speak. He fed the fire more bark. "They'll use them," she said. "Hold them to make sure I don't run again." "You won't run," he said quietly. She looked up. "So we hide?" His jaw clenched. "We live." She let out a laugh, short and sharp. "That's not the same thing." A gust of wind slammed into the cave, echoing like a voice trying to get in. She closed her eyes again. He thought she'd drift off, but her lips moved once more. "Why did you come back?" He didn't have an answer, not one she needed to hear, so he said nothing. But the storm outside kept asking for him. Later, when her breathing settled into steadier rhythm, he stepped outside. The rain had eased slightly. The air smelled cleaner now, like something had passed through. He followed the slope behind the cave, careful with each step. It was instinct that led him to the ridge. From there, he could see the glow, tiny, distant, but real. Torchlight. Too many to be travelers. A line of fire moving slow, winding down the path to the ceremonial field. He knew that road. It only led to one place, the altar clearing, where offerings were made when no one wanted them seen. He counted torches, 6, 7, 8, and one larger glow behind, the platform fire, already being lit. He clenched the rock beside him. They hadn't given up. They were preparing again. A different sacrifice, maybe. Or a message. His eyes scanned the line. A shape moved among them, smaller than the guards. Too small. He narrowed his gaze. A child, dragged on a rope, then another. His throat tightened. He turned back to the cave, fast. She was sitting up when he returned, eyes sharp now despite the pain. "You saw it too," she said. He nodded. "They're doing it again," she whispered. "Tomorrow morning." He knelt by the fire. "They'll use the children to bring the village back to fear. Offer one, maybe two. Tell the others it's penance." Her voice dropped. "I know where they're keeping them." He looked at her. "I heard it the night before they caught me, the sound of wheels and metal, not carts, not for farming, storage crates. They rolled them under Dakan's house." He remembered that house. Polished floor, always swept clean, too clean. "You're sure?" She nodded. "There's a cellar, but it's not marked." They covered it with rugs and nailed furniture down. He stared into the fire. The light danced over her scar. She followed his gaze, covered her wrist with her other hand. "You remember, don't you?" she asked. He didn't answer, but he did. And more than that, he remembered the shape of his father's voice, the way it cracked when the fire took him. The smell of roasted grain, meant for spirits, used instead to burn a man alive. He remembered Dakon's face then, calm, hands lifted to the sky, like he was doing something noble. He stood. She caught his arm. "We have to go back." "No." "You saw the children." I said no. Her grip didn't tighten, but her words did. "If we don't, who will?" He turned away. "I can't." Her voice dropped. "You already did." He stopped, slowly turned back. "You walked once," she said, "when they burned your father, when they lied. And when I pulled you from that flame, I thought you'd become something else. But maybe I was wrong." He stared at her. Rain still ran from his hair. His clothes clung to his skin. "You think you know what that did to me," he said. She didn't answer. He sat down hard. The fire hissed. Then, from the mouth of the cave, a voice. "You're both right." They spun. An old man stood there, leaning on a carved stick, blind eyes cloudy but strangely alert. His robe was patched with green and gray. His hair was twisted into thick ropes that touched his collarbone. Nara gasped. "Tarek?" The old man bowed slightly. "I heard the drums," he said, "but I also heard wheels, iron ones, heard them roll over wood that shouldn't be hollow, and I smelled old millet, spoiled, hidden too long." He stepped closer. They didn't lose the grain. They stored it, traded what they needed to Dakon's buyers, and kept the rest quiet. Until the next season, until they could raise the price. Kieran frowned. "How do you know?" "I used to be the storekeeper before Deccan took that from me, too." Nara leaned forward. "Is there proof?" Tarek smiled, toothless and dry. "A single sack. One with the seal of the council, hidden under the trapdoor, if it's still there." Silence. The fire cracked. Nara looked at Kieran, her voice barely a breath. "If we bring that back, if we show them, it won't change the dead," he muttered. "No," Tarek said, "but it might stop more." Outside, the storm began to slow, but inside Kieran's chest, something had begun to rise. Not rage, not revenge, resolve. He stood. She followed. Tarek nodded. "Then we move before dawn," the old man said. "While the wood is still swollen with rain, the floor will creak where it's been carved, and the hollow will call out to us if we listen." Nara stepped closer to Kieran. He didn't move away. The fire dimmed. The storm breathed its last. And far off, in the direction of the village, the drums began again. Slower, darker, calling not for justice, but for witnesses. The sky had not turned blue since the fire. Ash drifted through the canopy like snow that refused to melt. Kieran ran with the weight of Nara in his arms, each breath cutting sharp in his throat. The forest around them didn't speak. No birds, no monkeys, just the hush of trees still mourning something unnamed. They came to a clearing where the trees bent low and the air changed. Smoke lingered in the soil. The scent was old, burnt roots, damp charcoal, and something faintly metallic. Nara stirred, her breath ragged. He stopped just long enough to let her feet touch the ground. She blinked, dazed, then gripped his arm without speaking. Ahead, the trees opened to reveal a wide, shallow river, or what had once been a river. Now it flowed gray, murky, the color of bone dust and sorrow. Its surface shimmered strangely, reflecting not the sky, but the color of things long dead. The river of ash. Kieran's jaw tightened. "This is where it burned the hardest," he said, voice low. Nara looked at the water. "You mean the forest?" "No," he said, "my father." She didn't ask more. The river hissed as they stepped in. Cold at first, then warmer, unnaturally warm. The ashes stirred beneath their feet, coating their legs like second skin. Kieran moved first, eyes fixed on the far bank. Nara followed, her limbs heavy, her breath shallow. Halfway across, she slipped. He turned fast, caught her under the arm. Her knees sank into the muck. For a moment, she didn't move. "It smells like the altar," she whispered. He helped her up without answering. When they reached the other side, they collapsed onto a bed of black moss. Steam curled from their clothes. Kieran sat up first. His eyes scanned the tree line. Then he saw him, an old man seated on a log like he'd been waiting there his whole life. skin the color of worn bark, eyes clouded but open. His hands rested on a carved walking stick, shaped like two rivers crossing. Kieran rose, knife half drawn. But the man lifted a single hand and spoke before any blade could flash. "I heard you coming 3 days ago." Kieran hesitated. Nara sat up, squinting through the mist. "Tarek?" she asked. The old man smiled, toothless and slow. "You remember me, girl. Good. That means you haven't let Kalari rot everything." She stood, swaying slightly. "They said you vanished." "I did," he replied. "Vanished from men who thought silence meant safety." Kieran stepped closer. "You used to guard the granary." Tarek tapped the log beside him. "I still do, just not the one made of wood." He turned his head toward the sound of their wet clothes dripping onto the moss. "You've crossed the river. That means you're done pretending. Good." Kieran narrowed his eyes. "You know why we're here?" "I know why no one else came." A bird screeched in the canopy, then silence again. Tarek reached into his cloak and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in wax cloth. He opened it slowly, revealing 2 smooth stones. One smelled faintly of roasted millet. The other was etched with a faded emblem, Kalari's old council seal. "I kept these," he said, "because I knew someday the lies would start to rot from inside, and someone would want to know where the smell came from." He handed one stone to Kieran. "It rolled from the crate," he said. "The night I heard the wheels, same night the drums called a false thief." Kieran's fingers closed around the stone. It was heavier than it looked, warm somehow, as if it remembered fire. "There's more," Tarek said. "I followed the sounds. They unloaded at Khan's house. Then I heard the floor, hollow, poorly covered. I counted each footstep." Nara stepped closer. "Why didn't you speak?" "I did," he said. "To myself, to trees, to ghosts. I stopped speaking to men the day they burned a father for crimes he didn't commit." She glanced at Kieran. His face gave nothing. Then Tarek pointed east. "Past those trees, you'll see the edge of the old grove. Climb the red rock. When the sun hits the clearing, you'll see the white tree." "The white tree's just a myth," Kieran said. Tarek's smile deepened. "Everything true starts that way." They hesitated, but the old man sat back, folding his arms like he'd already seen the rest of the story play out. So they went. The forest changed again. Here the leaves were pale. The bark of trees turned smooth, almost bone-like. Mist clung low, hugging the ankles, veiling roots like secrets waiting to trip the unwary. Nara leaned on Kieran as they walked. Every few feet, a new sound. A branch cracking. A distant whisper of water. Once, the growl of something four-legged that decided not to approach. Then the ground began to rise. Red rock jutted from the soil like broken teeth. They climbed. And when they reached the top, they saw it. The white tree. It stood alone in the middle of an open space. Its bark was bright as moonlight. Its leaves shimmered with dew that never seemed to fall. Around its base were stones shaped by hand, old markers, cracked with time. Nara approached slowly, like stepping into memory. Kieran followed, silent. On one of the stones, carved into the face, was a name neither had spoken in years. Lunati, his father's. Kieran knelt, not from faith, but because his legs gave out. Nara stood behind him, watching. "The village forgot," she said softly, "but the forest didn't." He didn't look up. She crouched beside him, placed a hand on the bark. "It feels alive." "It is," he said. "Every year it blooms once. Only after the last drum of the festival, and only if no lie is told beneath it." She stared at him. "That's what he believed," Kieran said. "That truth had a weight, and the earth could hear it." They sat there for a long while. Then Nara reached into her bag, pulled out a piece of cloth she hadn't dared show before. Red, torn, the one she wore the night they caught her. Inside it was a single grain, round, uncooked, marked with ink. Kieran took it, turned it in his fingers. "Council seal," he said, just like Tarek said. She looked past the tree, toward the village beyond the woods. "They never meant to share it," she said. "They sold what they wanted, hid what they couldn't sell, and called it sacrifice." He nodded. Then, without warning, he stood, took the grain. walked to the stone marked Lunari, and planted the grain in the soil beside it, pressed it down with his thumb. "You think it'll grow?" she asked. "No," he said. "But if the tree listens, maybe it'll remember." A gust of wind rushed through the clearing. The white tree shivered. Leaves fell. One drifted down between them. It landed on Nara's hand, cool, dry, and strangely warm at the center. Chiron looked up, eyes clear now, voice steady. "We take the grain to the square." "They won't believe us." "They don't have to," he said. "They'll feel it." She met his gaze. In his eyes was not rage, but something deeper, a grief that had finally turned into courage. Then from the forest behind them, a sound. Metal on wood, a wagon, far away, moving slow, too heavy to be empty. Nara turned. That came from the village. Kieran's hand tightened around the hilt of his knife. "No," he said, "from the path below." And there through the trees appeared a shadow. A man pulling a cart, alone. Wheels creaked, sacks stacked high, tied in red thread. He didn't wear the village crest, didn't look toward them, just passed through the grove, then vanished again into mist. She turned to Kieran, eyes wide. "Did you see?" But he was already moving, back toward the path, back toward Kalari, with the grain in his pocket and the memory of ash in his lungs. And in the silence that followed, the white tree dropped one more leaf. It fell straight down and didn't touch the ground. The storm didn't ask permission. It came like a punishment from the sky, ripping through the forest, tearing leaves from branches, drenching earth that hadn't known mercy in weeks. Lightning cracked open the clouds, white and violent, carving jagged paths above the trees. Thunder rolled close behind, shaking stone and bone alike. Inside the cave, the fire barely held. Its flames flinched with every gust. Smoke curled in low spirals along the damp stone floor. Nara sat pressed against the wall, arms wrapped around her knees, hair soaked to the root. Her lips moved, but no words came. Across from her, Kieran crouched beside the dying fire. He was watching it, but not really. His mind was elsewhere, chained to an old altar, to a voice that once called his name with pride and was silenced by smoke. His hands were cut, his shirt torn. Rain clung to him like accusation. A low rumble outside was followed by the hard drumming of water on stone. Then something else, a single beat, not thunder, a drum. Another, then another, slower, deeper. It wasn't the wind, it was Kalari. From somewhere beyond the hills, the ceremonial drums began again, pulsing steady, like the heart of a beast waking in the dark. Nara looked up. "They're calling the village," she said, voice hoarse. "The ceremony is tomorrow." Kieran didn't move. She shifted forward closer to the fire. "They'll bring the children to the square at dawn. One will be offered, publicly, to make the village believe again." Kieran stared at the flame, watching it flicker like memory. "You said once," she whispered, "that when your father burned, the whole village stayed quiet, even the sky." He didn't blink. She leaned closer, eyes fierce now. "I won't die quiet." His jaw clenched. "You won't die at all." A crack of thunder rolled over them like a boulder. Then silence. She reached into the satchel beside her, pulled out a folded cloth. Inside was the council-sealed grain. "It's not enough," she said. "They'll say it was planted. They'll say we forged it. Then we show them where the rest is." She looked at him. He pulled the blade from his belt, not to threaten, but to feel the weight of something sharp and honest. "Tarek said the wood swells in storms, makes noise." She nodded. "The floor of Dakan's hall is old, built before the second harvest. If we wait till the rain softens it, the hollow spot will groan under the right step." Kieran stood. Lightning flashed, illuminating his face in profile, wet, marked by mud and blood and something older than both. She rose beside him. Outside, the rain shifted direction. It no longer pelted in rage. It wept sideways like sorrow pushing against stone. They packed quickly, left the cave behind, moved through the forest as if it knew them now, bending its branches, clearing its path. Thunder cracked once, loud but distant. The drums continued underneath, like a warning buried in the bones of the hills. By the time they reached the outer ridge of Kalari, the rain had softened to a mist. A glow hung low over the village, torches burning on high posts, smoke rising in tight coils. They crouched among the tall grass. Nara's breath hitched. "Look." He followed her gaze. At the center of the square, just below the altar platform, stood a crude wooden cage. Inside, the outlines of children, still hunched together, silent. One lifted her head. She couldn't have been older than 7. She was mouthing something. A name. Nara. Kieran grabbed her arm. "Not now!" Her voice cracked. "They're using them." "I know. I can't." "You will?" They slid down the hill, sticking to shadow. The house of Dakan stood at the far edge of the square. Its wooden frame was wrapped in silk banners soaked through by rain. 2 guards stood outside, half asleep, spears tucked in the crook of their arms. Chiron motioned right, circled. They crept behind the side wall, found the storage room entrance, slipped inside. The room was silent, but the smell— old millet, molded rice, damp wood, exactly as Tarek had said. They pulled back the rug in the center. Beneath it, polished floorboards, water-warped and oddly raised at the corners. Kieran stepped. A long creak rang out beneath him. He stepped again. The hollow groaned like a trapped animal. He dropped to his knees, ran his fingers across the boards. Then he felt it. Nails that didn't match, a line cut in the grain. He reached for his blade, but just as he touched the edge of the wood, footsteps. Outside, fast. Not guards, something lighter. Bare feet on wet tile. He turned, pressed against the wall. Nara tensed beside him. Then the door creaked. A boy entered. Small, thin, hair plastered to his forehead, eyes wide and glassy. He didn't scream. He didn't speak. He looked at them, then pointed to the floor, then stepped forward and whispered, "I saw him put it there." Kieran blinked. "Who are you?" But Nara's breath caught. She took a step closer. The boy coughed, wet, shallow, strained. His lips were pale. His skin almost blue at the fingertips. Then Kieran saw it. The marks on the boy's arm. Burns from fever. A rash across the throat. Medicine stains on his shirt. And just behind his ear, faint but unmistakable, a royal crest. The boy was Dakan's son. Nara looked at Kieran, then at the boy. "You're sick." The boy nodded. "Does he know you're here?" The boy shook his head. "Do you know what he did?" The boy didn't answer. He just pointed again. To the floor. Kieran dropped down, worked the blade beneath the seam, pried the boards loose, one by one. Then he saw it. A trapdoor. Wood warped with water. He lifted. Inside, sacks, dozens, each stamped with the crest. Council grain. Rotting. Hidden. A cache meant for no one but profit. And next to them, jars. Amber glass. Crates labeled with trade sigils, foreign ink, medical marks. Nara reached in, pulled one out. "Medicine," she whispered. Kieran stared, and something inside him cracked open. "He traded the food," he said. "He sold their hope for this." She held the jar. Her hands trembled. "But it was for his son," she said. They looked at the boy again. His breathing had slowed. He leaned against the wall, eyes fluttering. The medicine wasn't working anymore. Kieran stepped back from the hole. "We can't just show this," he said. "We have to carry it." She nodded, but her voice was hollow. "Can truth heal a dying child?" He didn't answer, only looked at the boy. Then from outside, a horn sounded. The dawn call. The drums stopped. Silence fell over Kalari. It was time. Nara looked at Kieran, voice barely a whisper. "And if we don't return, who will speak?" He gripped her hand. One beat, one shared breath. Then he blew out the lantern, and darkness took them whole. The sky hadn't decided what it wanted to be, sunrise or storm. A gray stillness hung over Kalari like held breath. Wet mist clung to the roots. The dirt squelched beneath every footstep. And in the center of it all, the Kei Trang stood silent. Its bark shimmered under the weight of 1,000 half-remembered promises. Villagers gathered beneath it, shoulder to shoulder, wrapped in damp shawls and fear. Children clung to their mothers. Elders stood like statues. No one spoke, not even the wind. Dakan emerged in a black cloak, its hem dragging through the mud. His face was pale, eyes hollow from a night without sleep. He moved with the deliberate rhythm of someone trying not to show the tremble in his hands. He raised both arms. The torchlight caught the gold on his cuffs. "The gods require fire," he said, voice steady despite the exhaustion. "And fire demands truth." The people didn't respond. Behind him, 2 guards dragged a small girl forward. She was barely old enough to carry water, but her wrists were tied. Her mouth was stuffed with cloth. Someone in the crowd gasped, but no one moved. The altar platform stood waiting, soaked but ready. The fire pit beneath had been refilled, despite the rain. Oil pooled at the base, catching faint reflections of the girl's wide eyes. And still, the K-Trang didn't move. Dakan turned toward the people. "This is what it means to atone." His voice rang out over the square. Then a new sound cut through it. Wet footsteps. 2 figures emerged from the edge of the crowd, soaked to the bone, mud-streaked, eyes fierce. "Kiran," and Nara. Gasps rippled through the crowd. One man took a step back. Another woman pressed her hand to her chest. The guards raised their weapons, but Dakan lifted a hand. Kiran stepped forward. No words. He held a sack in his arms, coarse burlap, water-stained and sealed with the mark of the village council. He let it fall. It hit the earth with a thud, a flat, undeniable sound. Then another sack. Then another, until the base of the Kai Trang was littered with grain. Council grain, unspoiled, unburned, hidden. Nara stepped beside him. She held up a jar, amber glass, the kind used by traveling merchants who dealt in medicine. The villagers stared. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The truth was visible. Damp, undeniable, and loud. For a moment, everything held still. Then Dakan stepped forward, his voice lowered, softer than before. "These are remnants, left from a past season, not for personal gain, for storage, for trade." He glanced at the jar in Nara's hand. "Medicine for my child," he added, barely audible. The crowd shifted. One man shook his head. Someone muttered, "Then why the sacrifice?" Dakan's jaw tightened. Kiran spoke. His voice was raw. "You said the gods demand fire." Dakan looked at him. Kiran stepped closer. "But it wasn't the gods who hid the food, or chained the children, or called a girl thief for giving the starving a scrap of bread." Silence. Kiran knelt. He placed one hand on the bark of the Koi Trang. "Let this tree judge." The villagers turned their eyes to the trunk. The wind picked up. Leaves rustled. Then a gust, sharp, sudden. The altar flame flickered, once, twice, then died. A long curl of smoke spiraled upward. People gasped, stepped back. A child cried out. Dakan turned, ice white. The fire was gone. The smoke wrapped around the tree, curling like a serpent, coiling up the pale bark. Someone whispered, "The tree, it breathes." Another, "It's angry." Dakan's face went pale. "It's a trick," he spat, "a trick to shame me." He turned to his guards. "Seize them." But the guards hesitated. One looked at the tree, then at the crowd, then slowly lowered his spear. Dakan's voice broke. "Do it!" Stillness. Then a voice from the crowd. Low, female, shaky. "I know that girl." All eyes turned. An older woman stepped forward, hair braided in gray cords. "She saved my son," the woman said, "years ago, from the fire near the grove. She carried him on her back." Nara blinked. Recognition bloomed slowly. The woman turned to the crowd. "She's not a thief, she's a protector." The murmuring grew. Others began to nod. One man stepped forward, pointed at the grain. "How long have we gone without food? Why did my brother die of fever while your son had medicine?" Someone else shouted. Dakan's shoulders tensed. He turned toward the Koi Trang. The tree groaned. A sound not made by wind, not made by storm. The bark cracked slightly, barely audible, but the silence made it thunderous. A leaf broke free. It fell slowly, spinning, spinning, then landed on the ground beside Dakan's foot. He stepped back, then stumbled, then looked at the crowd. No more belief, no more fear, only eyes, watching, judging, the same way he had. And behind him the Koi Trang stood tall, unmoved, but not silent anymore. Kiran looked at Nara. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply let out a long breath. Then, from the shadows behind the altar, a voice, small, dry, cracked by illness. Father. Everyone turned. The boy, Dakin's son. He walked forward slowly, one hand pressed to his side, the other gripping a carved piece of wood, his cane. He didn't speak again. He just looked at his father, and then quietly took Nara's hand. Dakin fell to his knees, but no one touched him. No guards, no villagers, no flames, only silence, and the hush of the Ki Trang. Nara's hand gripped the boy's tighter. Kieran stepped behind her, eyes never leaving Dakan. Rain began again, slow and fine, washing the mud, clearing the smoke. One leaf fell from the tree. It landed on the altar and curled gently, as if in rest. No one moved to relight the fire. No one needed to. The truth had already burned, and its smoke was still rising. Blood had no sound when it dropped onto stone, but Kieran heard it anyway. He sat alone on the outer steps of Dakan's house, rain misting across his shoulders, mixing with sweat and something darker. A shallow gash ran along his forearm, just under the sleeve. Clean, red, pulsing steady. It wasn't deep, but it didn't need to be. It reminded him he was still here. Still flesh. Still caught in a world where justice came too late and mercy didn't know where to land. Inside, the voices were quiet now. No more shouting, no more drums, just the low hum of disbelief. Dakan's son was gone. Kieran had carried him to the healer's hut himself, the boy's breath shallow, his body light as straw. And by the time they arrived, the trembling had stopped. No fever left to fight. Just stillness. The healer hadn't spoken. She'd simply covered the boy's face with a linen cloth, then turned away. And now Kieran sat. The steps were slick. The morning had turned gray again, lightless. A quiet settled over Kalari like ash. Then the door behind him creaked. He didn't turn. Nara's footsteps were soft but not hesitant. She stopped beside him, crouched down. Let me see. He didn't move, so she reached over and lifted his arm, gently unwrapped the cloth. Her fingers trembled slightly. Why didn't you let me treat it sooner? He looked at her. It didn't matter. She cleaned the wound with water from her satchel. The sting was mild but enough to make him flinch. She didn't apologize. Silence stretched between them. Then she said it. He's gone. Quirin nodded once. I was going to tell him, Nara whispered, that I was sorry for everything, for being part of the silence. Her voice cracked. I thought saving the village would be enough, that if we exposed the truth, the pain would stop. Quirin finally looked at her. It doesn't stop, he said. It just changes shape. He stood. The cloth, now soaked in blood and rain, slipped from his hand and landed on the stone. A small crimson mark bloomed beneath it. They turned toward the village square. Something had shifted there. The crowd had dispersed, but tension still lingered, hanging from rooftops, settling in doorways. The altar remained unlit. No one dared touch it, but in the center of the square stood the cage, empty now, except for a single ribbon, red knotted at one end, left behind by one of the children. A reminder of what almost was. Kieran stepped forward. And that's when he saw the guards. They weren't in formation. They weren't holding spears. They stood around Dakan, surrounding him, but not protecting. He was kneeling, hands bound in front of him, head bowed, his cloak soaked, no longer regal, his face unreadable. One of the elders stood in front of him, Oren, the stonemason turned council leader. He held a scroll. The village law. He read it aloud. The punishment for betrayal of the people. His voice was even, but not cruel. His exile, or blood. Dakan didn't speak, didn't plead, didn't lift his head. Oren looked at the crowd that had begun to gather. They weren't shouting. They were waiting, watching. Kieran felt Nara step beside him. He should speak, she whispered. He won't, Kieran replied. Why? Because guilt is louder than words. The wind shifted, then a sound. From Dakan. Not a cry. Not a word. A low, broken noise from the back of his throat. Like something trying to crawl out, but too ruined to form shape. He tried to rise, but his legs failed him. He collapsed forward. The guards didn't help. Nara moved, quickly, past the crowd, to the edge of the circle. She didn't touch him. She just crouched and said quietly, "Say his name." Dakan didn't move. The wind picked up. Leaves skittered across the stone. Then, with a hoarse rasp, he opened his mouth and said it. Kaelin, the boy's name, a single word. But it shook something loose. Nara stepped back. She turned to the crowd. "Let him bury his son." Silence. Then Orun nodded. The guard stepped aside. Dakan didn't run. He didn't rise quickly. He crawled. Across the stone, toward the healer's hut. Kieran followed with his eyes, but his fists were clenched. Because even now, even in ruin, the man had never said sorry. He looked at Nara. What if silence is the only truth he has left? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Because suddenly, something else drew their eyes. A figure stood at the far edge of the square. Tarek. The old blind man leaned on his carved staff, face turned toward the altar. He stepped forward. Slowly, the crowd parted. He reached the base of the koi trang and knelt. He placed a folded cloth at the roots, then stood and said, loud enough for all to hear, "I kept quiet too long. I smelled the millet, heard the wheels. I did nothing." He turned toward them. Truth isn't just what you speak, it's what you do after you fail. The words hung heavy. Then he turned back to the tree. "Let this be my penance." He bowed and walked away. No one followed. Not yet, but something had cracked. Kieran felt it, like stone softened by years of wind. Then Orun spoke again. "We build a new hall." "Not with stone," someone said. "Not with fire," said another. "With memory," Nara said. They turned to her, but her eyes were distant. On the ribbon, still fluttering, still red, still there. Then her voice dropped. "But before we build, we must bury." And Kieran knew she wasn't talking about Dakin's son alone. She was talking about the silence in all of them, the kind that hides in the bones and poisons slowly. She turned, walked past the altar, toward the edge of the woods, and without looking back said, "Come with me." Kieran followed, because sometimes the loudest truth is said with footsteps. The sky bled orange, not from the sun, from smoke. It rolled low over Kalari, thick as wool, curling into doorways, hugging the dirt paths, swallowing every breath it touched. People ran through it, but no one screamed. They were past screaming now. What gripped the village wasn't panic. It was dread, cold and ancient. The kind that made knees lock and hearts whisper to themselves. In the center of the square, the altar smoldered, not from fire, from memory. And standing before it, bound once again by ropes too thin to hold real guilt, was Nara. Her wrists were scraped raw, her dress torn at the shoulder, mud streaked one side of her face, but her eyes held, calm, focused, watching the crowd as if waiting for someone to step forward. But no one did. They were gathered just as before, tighter this time, faces pinched from rain and disbelief, but eyes trained forward, watching her, watching the man beside her. Dakan. His face was stone. Only the bruised circles beneath his eyes betrayed the storm inside. He stood before the crowd, but not as a leader, as a shadow, as the one who had made the fire come back. And again, it was not his voice that broke the silence. It was the sound of a child, coughing, a dry, rasping sound from the edge of the square. Heads turned. A boy stood under the branches of the koi trang, barefoot, wrapped in a shawl too big for him. Another cough. Then his voice, clearer than it should have been. "She saved me the night of the red dust." People turned fully now. The boy stepped forward. "She carried me when my legs were burnt, when my own uncle wouldn't open the door." Someone gasped. Someone else whispered a name. Toma. The boy looked up at Dakin. "You want to burn her again?" he asked. "Will you do it yourself this time?" Dakan didn't move. His jaw clenched. Nara's eyes never left him. Then came the rustle, soft at first, a shiver through the leaves of the kai trang. The air shifted. Even the torch flames bent, as if the tree had exhaled. The old bark creaked, and for the first time in decades, the uppermost branch bent low. No one had ever seen it move. not even during storms. A single leaf broke free, not blown, not shaken. It fell straight down. It landed at Nara's feet. Chiron stepped into the circle just as it touched earth. He wasn't running. He didn't raise his voice, but every step he took sounded like thunder. He carried nothing in his hands, no weapons, only a child, Kylin, or what was left of him. His body was wrapped in white cloth, small and light against Chiron's chest. A thin bracelet carved from red stone peeked from beneath the fold, the same one Dakin had worn as a boy, passed to his son. Dakin's shoulders buckled. Kieran said nothing. He simply walked past him, up the altar steps, and laid the boy at its center, the place where fire once waited. Then he turned to face the village. He was innocent, Kieran said, voice steady, but he paid for all of us. No one breathed. Dakan dropped to his knees. Not dramatic, just slow, like the weight finally caught up. Then for the first time he spoke, not in command, not in excuse, but in fracture. He couldn't breathe last night. His voice cracked. I sent for the healer. She said she couldn't come. A pause. She said it wasn't her place anymore. He looked at the ground. I held him. I begged him to stay. I told him I'd fix it all. Chiron's voice cut through the fog, but he was already gone. Dakan didn't answer. His hands touched the edge of the cloth, trembled. Nara stepped forward. She stood over them both. Her voice was quiet. Justice isn't fire. Dakan looked up. It's memory, she said, and choice. Behind them, the Khoi Trang rustled again. Its branches spread wider. The air warmed. Kieran turned to the crowd. You watched her burn once, he said. You stayed silent, like I did. He stepped down, but not again. He walked to the edge of the platform, and not while she's tied. He reached for her ropes. They weren't knotted tightly, not like before. He didn't cut them. He untied them. Deliberate, like pulling weeds from a poisoned field. The last rope fell to the ground with a soft thud. Nara didn't move. She looked at the altar, then at the boy, then at Dakan. She stepped toward him. He didn't rise, didn't flinch, only looked up and said, voice raw, if I could trade places with him, I would. She knelt, gently placed her hand on his shoulder. No, she said, you'll carry him longer this way. The drums had not returned, but something deeper pulsed through the crowd, a rhythm in their breath, a shift in their posture, truth without shouting. Then Nara turned to the Khoi Trang. She stepped beneath its lowest branch and placed both hands on the trunk. She closed her eyes and whispered, not to be heard, but to be released. A wind circled the square, soft, cool, and every leaf above her began to tremble. Dozens broke free, not one by one, all at once. They fell like rain, silver, silent, covering the altar, covering the child, covering the ropes, until the platform looked like a bed of snow, and the boy was no longer cold. The people didn't clap, didn't cheer. They bowed together for the first time, not to Dakin, not to the gods, to the tree, and what it had chosen to remember. Then through the hush came the first sound of dawn birds, as if they'd waited for silence to be holy again. Kieran stepped beside Nara. She leaned her shoulder against him. They watched the leaves settle. Then the tree creaked once more, and a single root broke the surface, slow, deliberate. It reached toward the altar and touched the cloth covering the boy. The root held still, then curled around him, as if to carry what Dakin never could, and the village understood. The earth had spoken, and it did not forget. The roots of the Khoi Trang had grown deeper. No one saw it happen, but they felt it. A year passed since the smoke curled around its bark, since a child's body was laid at its base, and the earth responded with silence, more powerful than fire. Now, under that same tree, the ground was soft with moss, and children ran barefoot between its shade without fear. No drums, no guards, no ropes, just the wind whispering through the leaves. And beneath it, a single wooden sign, carved roughly, not perfect, but honest. It read, "Truth does not save us from pain, but it saves us from the dark." Tarek traced those words every morning with his fingers. He didn't need to see them. He had memorized the edges, the grooves, the tiny splinters that bit back when he was too rough. His cane leaned against the tree. His back curved more now, but his breath was steady. When the village children asked him why he sat there all day, he only smiled. "I'm listening," he'd say. "For what?" "For the ones who haven't spoken yet." Kalari was quieter now, but not with silence that suffocates. Silence like a deep lake. Alive, reflective, patient. The granary had been rebuilt, not of stone this time, but woven bark and packed clay. Its door stayed open during daylight and no one guarded it. Beside it stood a board listing the names of every villager who had donated to fill it after the famine. Nara's name was first. Kieran's was never written, but everyone knew it anyway. He came to the village only when it rained, slipped between trees like he belonged more to the forest than the square. The elders said he had become a shadow walker, a man who spoke to rivers and trees more than people. But on the first night of every full moon, a small pile of dried herbs, carved fish bones, and sweet root knots appeared beside the koi trang. No one saw who left them, but Tarek always smiled when he touched them. The children still asked, "Where is she now, the woman who made the tree cry?" "Where did he go, the man who untied the ropes?" Tarek would lift his head, point a wrinkled finger toward the horizon. "They went where all truths go, into the soil. But will they come back?" "They never left," he'd say, then lower his voice. "Every time someone speaks, every time someone chooses to feed instead of fear, they're standing right here." He tapped the roots. The tree never answered, not in words, but each spring it bloomed early, and only one tree in Kalari did. Its flowers weren't white. They were red, deep, rich, the color of blood, of memory, of roots that remember fire. They called them leaves of witness, and when they fell, they never curled. They lay flat, as if listening. Oh? One evening, just after the rains ended, a boy named Oba, barefoot, too curious, always asking questions, found something beneath the moss behind the tree. A wooden box, small, smooth, tied with a strip of red cloth. Inside, a single dried leaf, pale with time, and a folded piece of cloth. Nara's, still stained faintly with smoke and soil. On the back, stitched in thread so fine it barely held. If we do not return, listen anyway." Oba ran to Tarek, breathless, shouting. But the old man only nodded. He had heard it already, that morning before the boy had woken. The sound. Not drums, not thunder, but a soft pulse from deep in the woods. 3 beats, even, low, fading, then returning, and each time stronger. Kieran had once told him that sound lived in trees long after people left them, that if you pressed your ear against bark just before dusk, you could hear the voices of those who chose truth instead of silence. Oba tried it for weeks. Nothing. Then one evening he swore he heard it. Not words, but breath. Like someone exhaling just behind the bark, and a whisper that wasn't his own. They're listening now. That year, Kalari didn't hold the Festival of Rain, not because they forgot, because they were building something new. A small school, made of woven walls and soft thatch, with open windows and benches carved from fallen trees. They didn't name it after a chief or a warrior. They called it the House of First Questions, because Nara had once said the first time a child asks why, the village must choose truth or fear. Kieran never stepped inside. But one evening, Oba swore he saw a figure at the edge of the trees. A man, barefoot, cloaked in wind. Beside him, a second figure, smaller, lighter, a girl. No one else saw them, but Oba said the air smelled different that night, like wet firewood, and the sound of drums far away, not heavy, not angry, but slow, almost like a heartbeat. The elders didn't laugh. They only looked toward the horizon, toward the tree, toward the place where 2 people had once stood alone and chose not to be quiet. And though no one carved it, and no one wrote it, everyone in Kalari remembered what the forest had taught them, that justice isn't a moment, it's a rhythm. And silence isn't always absence. Sometimes it's waiting. Sometimes it's listening. Sometimes it's the sound of a tree that remembers what fire tried to erase. Sometimes the most powerful voices are the ones that speak without sound. They rise from the places we least expect, from the cracks in old wood, from the breath between words, from the silence we carry inside us for too long. In every village, in every heart, there comes a moment when truth stands at the edge of fire, and someone must choose to turn away or to stand still and face it. This was never just a story about right and wrong. It was about the weight of silence, about how justice isn't always loud and mercy doesn't always wear a crown. Sometimes the real courage lies in staying when it's easier to run, in listening when it's safer to speak, in forgiving not because it's deserved, but because it's the only way forward. And in the end, no matter how many leaves fall, no matter how far the roots must reach, what matters is whether we leave behind something worth growing from. A word, a choice, a seed, a sound, a memory. Because even after the fire fades and the drums go quiet, the earth remembers, and so do we. Thank you truly for walking this path with us. If this story touched something in you, a memory, a question, a quiet place you hadn't visited in a while, please let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear where you're watching from and what stayed with you most. Don't forget to follow, subscribe, and share this story with someone who might need to hear it. Until next time, may your silence be brave and your truth be louder than fear.